Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thrilled that you have chosen to spend some time thinking about the role of the media in elevating our nation's public discourse and our state's public discourse. This programming is part of an exhibition put on by of rare books and art put on by the Harrison Center, the Sagamore Institute, and the Remnant Trust in Indiana, bringing rare books to life, rare books of political philosophy, political theory, and through the work of local artists, and to the end of creating an immersive conversation in all things civis, all things related to life in community together and this joint project of civilization. And it's hard to talk about those things without talking about the media these days. It feels like it's all around us. It's part of the air we breathe, for better or for worse. And to help shed some light and bring some clarity to some of the big questions facing our country, facing our locality, we have some incredible people that are part of our conversation tonight who are going to share with us some of their thoughts, some of their best practices, some of their theories about the role of the media in modern American life. We have Oseye Boyd from the Indianapolis Recorder, the editor there. We have Nate Feltman, co-owner of the IBJ. We have Abdul-Hakim Shabazz of Abdul at Large, the radio show. And we have Dan Spehler, anchor of our very own Fox 59. So thrilled to have each of you here to be a part of this conversation. You guys are all leaders in our state, in our city on these topics. So really grateful to have you here.
My pleasure.
Great to be with you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So it's hard to, like we talked about, it's hard to get away from the media these days. It's everywhere. Raging headlines, we all have smartphones, we all have social media, and of course cable television, radio as well. And it seems like these technologies that were created to give us more information, bring us closer together, and help us make more informed decisions. It feels like we're in this information overload. And I have a question that I'd like to bring up with Nate. First of all, Nate, I'm of the mind it's good that we don't have gatekeepers anymore. We don't have a centralized government controlling our flow of information like some countries today have. We no longer, at this point in history, have the Pope dictating what we're able to see and read and consume. And unlike 30, 40 years ago, there's not just a few newspapers and a few cable televisions and a few radio shows that everyone consumes. There aren't these centralized controllers of information anymore. And I think that trend towards democratization of freedom of information and communication is good. But again, do we have too much? We have so much at our fingertips that anyone with an iPhone can be a journalist. And I'm wondering, there are good things, but there are obvious drawbacks. And the incendiary is rewarded. What are your thoughts on how we think about some of these important issues?
Yeah, it's a big question. And once again, good to be with Oseye, Dan, and Abdul. And Lex Alexander, thanks for putting this together. So it certainly seems that the democratization of the media has been positive in many cases, and you illustrate that a bit. I thought of the Arab Spring as an example where clearly the demonstrations and the push for change came about in many cases because of the ability for opposition leaders and ordinary citizens to find each other, think about change that they want to bring about, organize and demonstrate and push for that change. So that certainly seems like a force for good. On the other hand, we know that the forces of oppression and authoritarianism are attempting, and in many cases are successful, like China in many cases, at controlling and censoring the technology platforms. And so there's the good and the bad that I think that you outline. And then the piece that you mentioned, the challenge of trying to decipher and understand what is actually accurate and true information versus what might be called fake news, right? It's a common term now. And I think that's something that we're all grappling with as users of the different media that are available today. And my feeling is that we're beginning to get savvier. All of us are beginning to get savvier about what's being put on the internet or put on our phones and brought to us, and that we are many of us are doing the extra work that it takes to dig and find what the source is. Is it a trusted source? Is it real journalism? Is there a organization that is known and has a sense of integrity behind it? And I think we're all getting better at that, and I think we'll all continue to get better at that as we progress. So big issues and lots of challenges. And I'll let some of the others on the Zoom call just give their take. Thank you.
Yeah, anyone's welcome. Yeah,
Can I
please go
jump
ahead. Please, of
I
course.
want to disagree that we're getting better at at figuring out the source. And I say that because when I jump on Facebook, or people send me things on Instagram and Messenger, and they have no idea who these people are. And it's like, just because it's online is fact. And there's many times I've received things or seen people on my Facebook feed losing their minds about something that's satirical. And they're like, how could someone print this? How could someone do this? And then I have to say, okay, that's satire. That's not even real. You're actually getting very upset about something that was meant to be funny. I get all kind of messages from people who want to be helpful and save my life, and tell me, they're not to touch the pump on the gas at the gas. When you go get gas, be careful because there could be a needle. I mean, all these little things that a chiropractor telling you about drinking hot water to protect yourself from the coronavirus, that every half hour drink something hot to wash it down your stomach, because then the acid in your stomach will kill the virus. If that's how things work, I'm sure we would have no viruses right now. So it's those kind of things that I think people just run with. They just see it and they think, they don't really spend much time thinking about, okay, is this true? Where's it coming from? They don't think about the veracity of what they're reading.
Right.
I'm just thinking I can go back decades now to when people just started sending emails. You got those weird chain emails with, be careful, don't worry about, don't be on the lookout for this thing. And it's still the same thing, but it's just now in a different medium. And I often tell people, if you don't know this source, go to the About page. That is like one of the best places to go and find out if this is a real news outlet or what their agenda is. Go to the About page, and then you can kind of determine whether this is something that you should believe or not.
I agree. And you mentioned Alexandra, you mentioned gatekeepers, and that's always been a role that journalists have played. And I think some of that gatekeeping function now falls on the user and on the consumer, to take a look at all the sources of information that are out there and really discern what the best information is. Because I think, you talk about getting news from different perspectives. Maybe when you talk about cable TV news, does one channel lean one way and one channel lean another? And I often find that as a viewer of cable news, it takes an even more discerning eye, because I think it comes down to the hour of programming you're watching, maybe the particular anchor or news presenter that you're watching. A show from Hannity on Fox News is going to be far different than something from Chris Wallace or Brett Baer or Martha McCallum in another time slot. And same with MSNBC. You're getting programming from longtime trusted NBC News journalists. You're also getting some more commentary in other time slots. And so I think, especially when it comes to social media, Shia, you mentioned, just so much information out there, and a lot of it's misinformation. We're really seeing in the midst of this pandemic how troubling that can be when people come across information that's meant to trick people into thinking one thing or another that's not true. When it comes to our health and our safety, I mean, this year, I think that issue has defined our lives, but it's defined our lives because a lot of people simply don't believe it. And you hear these stories about ICU doctors and nurses treating people who have coronavirus who say, there's no way I have coronavirus, it's a hoax. And they literally are caring for them as they breathe their last breaths. it's troubling to see. So I think we need to be better at informing people about media consumption. I mean, we're here, we're producing content, but maybe we also need to be better in terms of telling people, you know, a little bit more about the different kinds of information out there, and guiding people through that process of being better news consumers as well.
Dan, I love that because, you know, like we talked about, probably net positive that more democratization of freedom, but with freedom comes responsibilities, and we
Sure.
don't have a robust vocabulary to talk about the duties we have for how to wield these new freedoms well, in a way that is befitting a member of you know, our social contract, our community.
As
And
Peter Parker once said, with great power comes great responsibility.
there you go. That's what I was grasping for. Here I thought it was
Right.
Plato, but it was Peter Parker.
No, but to piggyback on what the other three panelists have said, whenever somebody sends me something on social media, I'm always skeptical. And I kind of take it's the old, Nate, you probably remember this because you and I are in the same age group, the old Tootsie Roll cartoon, where the kid says, Mr. Owl, how many licks does it take to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop? And he licks, he goes 1, 2, then he takes a bite of it, 3. My rule is if it takes you more than 3 clicks to get to the actual news source, it's probably in that fake news, not real news category. Because the good thing is that with the democratization, and like I say, you know, citizen journalists are great, but citizen journalists don't have the training that all of us have.
Yeah.
Citizen journalists didn't go to journalism school. Citizen journalists didn't have no years of experience as a writer, as an editor, you know, as a photographer, as a reporter. And so you have to look at the source of the information and ask yourself, okay, is this the source of information I can trust? Or maybe I can't trust this, maybe I can find the link, you know, that they found this on. Because I've been arguing with people for the past 2 weeks about Donald Trump and his frivolous lawsuits. And people are saying, well, no, they have an affidavit, and the affidavit is evidence. Like, well, no, not necessarily, because the affidavit could be hearsay. It could be a lot of things that would never be admissible in court. And so it's just, I think our job is to give people information, but also people need to be better consumers of news and information.
The Tootsie Roll rule of media consumption. I think that's the title of your next book, Abdul. That's great. Oseye, I'm wondering, how do you keep these tensions and these you know, the potential for a misuse of information, our tendency just as humans to interact with these platforms with our lizard brains? Like, behavioral psychologists have developed these platforms to keep them addictive and to not think, to kind of bypass the reason. And I'm wondering how does this inform how you make editorial decisions about really important topics? You know, everything from what's going on with Donald Trump's frivolous lawsuits, to quote one of our panelists, to our nation's reckoning with racial injustice in our country, which is long overdue. These are important conversations, important things that need to be reported on rigorously. But there are all these challenges. I'm curious, how do you view your responsibility to those things at the Recorder?
Well, I view my responsibility as a journalist to be fair and balanced, to make sure that when we write stories, we are being as fair and balanced as possible. We are not putting in our viewpoints in a story. That's my job when I write my editorials. But in stories, it doesn't belong there. So, and I can pick up sometimes on language that's like, that's leaning a little too far one direction or another. And since I kind of know my writers, I know how they feel about things. I'm like, yeah, I could feel you were in here a little bit. Or just when you're talking to a source and you're leaning too hard on one source and not giving the other source to balance that out enough time to balance that out. So those are things that I try to do as editor to make sure that we are keeping that approach that is journalism 101. And I think that's at the heart of what I do, is even though we're a Black newspaper and we've always been at the forefront of fighting for racial injustices and social justice, we've always done that. That's kind of been that's our history, that's our legacy. But I keep going back to journalism 101. This is who I am. This is what I've been taught. And to I think it was Nate, your point, or maybe it was Abdul, I'm not sure, I'm sorry, the point about citizen journalists. I am someone, I think it was you, Abdul. I am someone who I take exception to some of the citizen journalists because I've gone through some training that helps me realize when I'm putting my bias in a story. And sometimes we get a lot of stories out there that are totally biased and that instigate trouble more so than they actually help solve something. One of the things that I came here with was when we write articles, they should have 3 E's, my 3 E's at least: education, empowerment, engagement. We want to educate our readers, we want to empower them with knowledge, and we want them with those things to go out and engage in the community. So the story should do one or all of those 3 E's. Then we kind of added on entertainment here and there because we do need to entertain as well and have a little fun. Nothing's wrong with entertainment. But when you kind of keep that strategy in mind, then that helps you to understand what you're doing. And I never want to be sensational. I don't want to just write a story just to get clicks, just to get people to buy the paper because it's a sexy story or a sexy headline. I want to have substance. And I think that's kind of what I do to make sure that I am kind of staying true to what I came in this industry for, is to make sure that we are being fair, balanced, trying to stay unbiased as much as we can, because we all know we have biases. But just kind of doing what I know to be real, true journalism, to do hard hitting stories that make sense and are not sensational, but empower our readers to make good decisions and to live their lives better.
It's a great point, Oseye, about how you view your role as putting out substantive work, and you that's what you think about, like where's the rigor, where's the truth, and what's the best unbiased representation of the truth, when many today in our media culture, that's not their primary goal. Their primary goal is to, clickbait, right? It's the sensationalism, it's the hate clicks even. It's and that raises another important challenge to elevating our media culture. And I'd like to get Abdul's thoughts, and of course anyone else can chime in, but there are perverse incentives in our media culture. If it bleeds, it leads. This has been kind of a saying in media for a very long time, but it has led to just kind of where our cable television is, it's like gladiators in the arena. People watch it because it's like people fighting to the death, and there's no enlightenment, there's no pursuit of truth. It's not good. It's not good for people's souls who watch it, and it's certainly not good for our public discourse. But it makes it keeps people coming back for more. So how do we don't want people to do these things for free, but how do we balance the obligations that these that we might have to elevate our discourse?
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind is, and it's funny because I was cleaning out the garage the other day and came across some old journalism books from undergraduate school, and I was going through some of my notes. I remember something one of my old journalism professors said, which kind of shocked all of us. He's like, "Hey guys, what's the job of newspapers?" This is like 1991. Like, no, to give news, to give information. Like, no, the job of newspapers is to sell advertising. I hate to be the bad guy here, but the job of news is to sell advertising. Now, who you sell your advertising to and how you do it is a little bit of a different thing. Now, you can go highbrow, you can go PBS, you can be the Wall Street Journal or New York Times or Washington Post, or you can be the National Enquirer. But I think that's sort of first and foremost is our job is to stay employed and to eat. I mean, that's kind of number one. Now, with that said, I think it basically boils down to your kind of journalism moral compass, so to speak, which is, are you writing a story just for clickbait, or are you writing a story to really inform or do something with the public in general? In any politics, our audience is basically 1,000 people. It's all the politicians, lobbyists, mover shakers. It's that group of people, and so that's who I talk to on a regular basis with the stories that we write, then things I talk about on the radio show as well. So for me, that is my audience. My audience has a certain expectation of truth, honesty, and integrity, and so I make it a point to deliver that when possible. Yes, I also do commentary, and yes, like Ms. Boyd said, a little bit of the entertainment to kind of keep them interested, because it is an entertainment medium to a certain degree, because nobody wants to sit there and read something or watch something that's completely boring. But I think it behooves us to have that right balance of almost sort of infotainment, so to speak. We can be entertaining, but we can also be informative And as a journalist or a media person, you got to figure out where that line is, because you're right. For some people, if it bleeds, it leaves, but that's their thing that's going to hopefully get you to stay for the next 14 minutes to get you to the weather of the
Well, and
sports.
I when it comes to that point about balance, I'd push back on the notion that in media there's no enlightenment or no pursuit of truth. It's sort of a blending of all of these factors. Obviously, there are the business motivations that any media company has to get people to watch or to read. But the way you get people to watch and to read is to provide a product that is enlightening and that does pursue truth. And I think that we can do all of those things at one time. There are obviously specific stories or maybe media outlets that bend one way a little too far towards that sort of it leads mentality or clickbait. And I think that again comes down to the discerning news consumer to find out what they see out there that is legitimate journalism. And I think, again, really successful outlets can do all of those things at once. They can be successful and sell advertising to the many sponsors out there, but the ones who are making the most money are generally the ones who are being the most enlightening and digging up the most true journalism, because people do want that source of news. And so I think, if you do it right, you're doing all of those things. You're making money, but you're also providing a product that does truly enlighten people on the news of the day. And on cable news, it can sometimes be loggerheads, right? Where people are just shouting at each other. But then there are other segments maybe where there is a more enlightening, deeper dive on a specific topic. We always kind of joke, I think, in our editorial meetings about the analogy of a well-balanced meal, that sometimes, you need to have your vegetables, you need to have some red meat, maybe a little dessert in there too.
I cringed a little bit, Abdul, when I heard your quote from your professor that the job was to sell advertising. If my editors thought that was or my reporters thought that was the role of the IBJ, I think we'd be in a lot of trouble. But I understand your point about having to stay in business. I love what Oseye said about her 3 E's, educate, empower, and engagement, because I think we take a very similar approach at the IBJ. It's absolutely true, of course, that bad news sells. I mean, there's studies out there that show that more people remember bad news than they remember it longer than they remember good news, and they pay more attention to negative headlines. I didn't go to journalism school like Oseye and Abdul. But I've heard and heard from some of my journalists at the IBJ that that's often how journalists are trained. That naturally a negative headline is likely to get more eyeballs and more clicks, perhaps. So, but we take our role incredibly serious as a convener, as a purveyor of information, the ability to get people to understand both sides of issues, and I think that's one of the reasons we're successful, and Abdul is part of that in the forefront product that we have, where we have people on both sides of the aisle giving input and perspectives so that people can arrive at their own conclusions on policy and public issues of the day. So it is a balance. I think we lost Dan there, but I think Dan was talking about that balance, and there's no doubt there's a balance. We have to stay healthy on the bottom line in order to keep doing what we're doing. But I know a lot of our folks believe entirely in the mission, and the mission is one about community. It's certainly about engagement, as Oseye has mentioned, and education on important issues of the day.
I find it interesting, though, that everyone talks about how they don't like negative news. They don't want negative news. They don't like if it bleeds, it leads. They don't like that.
But they read it.
It's contrary to what you actually go to. And I find that so very interesting. And I don't even think of news in a negative or positive way. I just think of it as the news. It's reality. It's what's happening. So, and then to your point, Abdul, about your professor telling you about ads, Nate, as a reporter, I would have been right there with your reporters.
Right.
Like, what? What are you talking about? As an editor, even though I'm still not involved on the advertising side, I see a bigger picture now. I see
Sure.
it more than I did as a reporter. And so I see how the bottom line affects everything we do. So I have to say that, yeah, that professor, even though I hate to agree with the professor, he was onto something, because I have to remind my writers that, look, without the ads, there's nothing.
It's a balance, right? Because both sides can't survive without the other.
And that's what, and so I try to create harmony when I came here. Like, there's no reason for sales and the editorial side to hate each other. Like, we need each other. We have to work together, because if we don't have ads, guess what? Nobody's going to see all this hard work you spend on this story. Nobody's going to ever see it.
I would also say, just shifting gears a little bit, the hysteria, the chaos that you see. I think we all see that more on the national front, and federal issues and national issues versus what we see here locally. And I think there's always going to be a strong need, I believe strongly, for accurate news, organizations that have integrity, can deliver the news locally. And as Dan mentioned, we saw it more this year than any year, right? With the need for information, accurate information, timely information, that we're all dealing with the challenges of this year. And I think that's never been more true. And I also think that we do have better and stronger communication, across different groups and people throughout the city, more locally. And I've seen it happen as a result of some of the racial injustice issues. I've seen incredible conversations happen locally. I've been part of a lot of them. Abdul, I'm sure, Oseye, I'm sure you have, Dan, where, these issues, and they're very civilized. They're very great. There's outcomes that I think are going to be positive. And so, I don't think it's all negative, but I do think, if you turn on the cable news station and they're all opinionated on both sides of the aisle, and that turns people off in general to the media. But I think if we look more about what's happening locally, I don't think it's quite the same.
I tend to agree, because just real quickly here, particularly on the national front, because the Newsmax cable channel is technically the fastest growing news channel right now, because people don't think Fox is conservative enough. Because I am not making this up, is with Newsmax, which I just started watching just to see what the big deal is. And I could only watch like 10 minutes of it, then had to turn back to Law and Order Special Victims Unit. It was interesting because they were on the full Trump train about, fraud, thousands of fraudulent votes. And this person saw, a truck come out at 2:00 in the morning and drop off a bunch of ballots for Joe Biden. I'm like, okay, well, how would you know it's a ballot for Joe Biden? First of all, what are you doing in an alley at 2:00 in the morning, number one? Number two, how do you know they're all ballots for Joe Biden? Because the only way you know that if you look through them. So it's interesting. It's called the social judgment theory, where people tend to seek out opinions and views that justify their own world point of view, which is why my father, when he was alive, was a big Fox watcher. My niece is a big MSNBC watcher, and they would basically be arguing the same thing, but just from two totally different perspectives, because that's where they both got their news from on a regular basis.
Well, you talk about, I really appreciate Nate's point about local news, because I think we have a great press corps here in Indiana. But even at the national level, we tend to focus on the example of cable news being a negative influence, but there is some really great journalism being done at the national level. I tend to talk about TV news because I'm in television. 60 Minutes, Nightline, CBS Sunday Morning. They do some really great work every single week. And I don't think, people tend to focus on the positive examples of journalism that's out there that is impactful, that's doing a great job covering the news. Again, CBS Sunday Morning, just as an example, such a interesting show. It's a little quirky. It covers some serious news, but it also covers some really lighthearted segments and features that just give you a slice of life in an hour and a half that is very impactful, I think. So, I think we got to focus on some of the positive examples that are out there too.
Dan, that's an incredibly astute point that with many of these challenges, there is a duality. Like with social media, it helped start the Arab Spring, but also is criticized for undermining our democracy. We're in a sort of like intellectual renaissance of great podcasts and great bloggers and great journalists right now. Yet there's also a prevalence of misinformation and like people can't distinguish between satire and there's overt lies on the internet too. So there is this, or even what you said, like at the national level, there is gladiatorial cable news and there's 60 Minutes. Like there is this like two sides of the same coin. And I think keeping both those things in mind is healthy because that's the truth. The truth is usually, somewhere, somewhere in between, but it's difficult to think that way, to kind of keep multiple gradations in mind. But Dan, I'm curious, how do you, I love Nate's point, and I think it's absolutely correct that the local politics is often less polarized, less partisan than the national level. Part of that is, we might go to church with our city councilman or see Mayor Hogsett at the grocery store. Like there's less like mediation, and we might even know these people personally, and they're more accountable. We know where City Hall is if we don't like where things are going. So I'm wondering how you balance these things as you report. You're an anchor of Fox 59, our local TV station, and I'm wondering, on one hand, like how do you balance the local reporting and the national that might attract news and also eyeballs rather, but it also is very important.
Well, especially in this time where we're so politically polarized and national politics has been such a driving force behind the headlines. We do a Sunday morning show, 30 minutes every Sunday. A couple of you have been part of the program in the past called In Focus that airs on Fox 59 and CBS 4, where we try to dive into everything related to Indiana politics. Now, probably more so over the last few years than I'd like. A lot of that has been, national politics, but here's what the Indiana politicians are saying about what's going on at the national level. And that's hard to avoid because, we've been in the midst of some very important and serious discussions about our democracy, what kind of a country we are, what kind of politics we want to have. And so you want to be local on programs like ours. But lately, so much of the conversation has revolved around some of these really intense and burning national political questions. So perhaps we'll see, over the course of time that evolve a little bit more. It'll be an interesting time at the State House over the next year or so as they try to navigate the effects of this pandemic when it comes to funding our state schools and making sure that Indiana is bouncing back and getting our businesses back up and running. We also have a lot of new leaders at the Indiana State House. Some of the old guard, like Speaker Bosma, have moved on. Others have come in. And so it'll be interesting to see how things progress at the State House. We'll be following that very closely as the session starts next year. And just the big question of how do they even, conduct business in the midst of a pandemic. But we want to drill down on those local issues because that's what matters to people. That's how you get your roads paved, and that's how you get everything at the local level that you need that's truly important to you and your family. So I think that dynamic might shift over the course of the next, couple of years into, even having more of an intense focus on local. That's what I'd like to see our program do even more of as we move forward here over the next couple of years.
Excellent. Appreciate that, Dan. I'd like to hear from each of you. We've talked about that there maybe is more of a duty and more of an obligation on consumers these days than in past eras in terms of how we seek out and consume our media information. So I'm curious to hear from each of you. What are your media consumption habits? How do you decide? We heard that the Tootsie Roll, the 3-click technique already, and that's a great way to kind of self-vet. But other than that, other techniques, other habits, I like to shut off on the weekends. That's like my kind of just to distance and just I feel like the soul heals itself in silence. So, and we're just bombarded all the time. So that's one thing I do, but I'd be curious to hear from each of you, your media habits and just ways to kind of keep distance and perspective.
My day starts every day at 4:30 in the morning. I let the dog out, make my coffee, then I go turn on public radio. from 5 until 6, and I kind of watch the cable news for a little bit from like 6 until about 7. And then I'm pretty much kind of done with the news until later on in the day. But I listen to NPR because, and I'll deny this if anybody ever accused me of it, I can't stand listening to radio with people yelling and screaming all morning. I can't do it.
No.
I need quiet in the morning. I need quiet. I need peace and quiet. And I did morning radio for 10 years. And one thing I never was a big shouter or yeller or screamer, because people are trying to get their kids to school, all the stuff going on. Last thing you need is some jackhole yelling and screaming all day. So now later in the evening, that's a little bit of a different creature. I'll flip through all the cable stuff and we'll watch the intellectual mud wrestling, go on. But that is sort of my habit. But something to keep in mind too is, and think about this, like 20, 30 years ago, it was like Crossfire and McLaughlin Group. I mean, those were the big, yelling and screaming of what's going on, and everybody got all worked up because Pat Buchanan and Michael Kinsley would yell at each other. I mean, now that would be considered extremely tame by today's standards of opinion journalism and consumption. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I love McLaughlin. We used to watch like every Saturday night on WTW in Chicago at 5:00. But I think as a news consumer, I don't get my news from one place. Never have. I mean, it's Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Fox 59, and some of the other local people. But I never get all my news from one place because everybody has a bias, but for the most part, everybody is also fair. Bias doesn't bother me at all. As long as you're fair, we're good to go. But by consuming lots of different news, I can get a full and more informed picture of what's going on.
Did you mention the IBJ? I'm really depressed.
Oh, IBJ 8 at 8. That's the.
So
I go hop in the shower.
So I'll jump in. I start out with the Indy Star. I read the Star. I read the 8 at 8 from the IBJ. I read the Wall Street Journal, and often from the 8 at 8, I will get drawn to the New York Times or Washington Post, and through links and so forth. And that's how I generally start my day. And I end my day by flipping back and forth between CNN, Fox, and whatever else that might make some sense. I actually try to once in a while watch the evening news, but that's an old thing. My kids are like, "What are you talking about, Dad? I don't watch that." But I'm sort of old school. But and just to add to that, there is obviously a huge difference between journalism that Oseye and myself and Abdul are involved in terms of written, and the TV side of things, and then the social media side of things. So I think my hunch is, and you all know more than I do on this front, that people are reading less, right? Or if they're reading, they're just reading the headlines often. Right. And so the phone, it's harder to read a lot on your phone than it would be to watch a video on your phone, and just in terms of the intensity and so forth. So, I mean, that's something that I hope will make a comeback. We're actually seeing a comeback for us. We just to toot our own horn a little bit, we just hit an all-time high at the IBJ. We just surpassed 2001 numbers for subscriptions. So, wow. And we just broke a record in terms of print subscriptions as well as digital. So. I think there is a little bit of a comeback, and I hope it continues. But there's a big difference there between the types of journalism and the media that we're talking about, obviously.
Well, and to your point about headlines and tweets, I think so many people do get their news from social media now that it's a little bit more incumbent on us to make sure that the headline and the tweet really, as best it can in 280 characters, encapsulates the story in a fair way, because sometimes the perception you get just from the headline or from the tweet that you happen to pull a quote from to write up in that post, if it doesn't exactly match the story in a full contextual way as best you can in the space you have, that can be what sometimes gets people a different perception of the story. But back to media consumption, for a lot of it, for me, is based on social media as well, because not only are we here in the studio anchoring the news for 3.5 hours every evening, I'm also in the morning really spending a lot of time with my kids. They've been in school virtually, so I've been sort of guiding them through that virtual school process. And so my typical media consumption habits pre-pandemic are very different now, where I may have had more time to listen to news on the radio, read through a lot of news. A lot of it is driven by what I will come across on my news feed, although I do always try to take time to read Indy Star and USA Today, IBJ, New York Times. IBJ, by the way, you guys really do some great coverage of state governments, with some folks that we've, obviously Leslie, someone who's been around the State House a long time, and Lindsay Urdoti, who's just done a great job covering state politics as well. So I always try to catch up on IBJ and the Star and what all of our competitors are covering as well. But I think I'd be interested to know, what others feel about whether their habits have changed throughout the pandemic, just because of the different, perhaps different routines that we get into, and also whether that has affected the average news consumer and if their consumption of news is different right now. Because I know it is for me, because I spend a lot of time scrolling through our kids' assignments and doing all those things. So it's definitely affected the way I consume the news.
Well, I don't know that the pandemic has affected my consumption or changed it, but just being an editor has really changed my news consumption. I try to keep up with everything, and that's really hard.
Yeah.
I try to keep up with everything that's going on nationally, locally, statewide, and then like regionally, just neighboring states, just because you never know what I may need to know.
Yep.
I'm often called and people want to talk to me about something, and I'm like, crap, I don't know what that is about. So I feel like I need to read everything. We keep the news on, we keep a news cable news station on in the newsroom, so we always know what's going on throughout the day. I try to watch local news at noon online, and sometimes I forget, and I'm like, daggone it, it's 1 o'clock. I missed it, or I'm doing something. So I try to do that, and I also read. Not only am I reading the copy from the reporters, I'm trying to read articles all day long. One of my favorite sites is ProPublica. Long stories. I usually cannot finish one at one sitting because it's so much, and I'm just moving all the time. But in-depth stories, really, really good. Obviously, I'm a writer, so I read more than I watch or listen to to the news. But I definitely love ProPublica. Read a lot of other sites as well. So I have my news on my phone. I get alerts all day long, and so then as I get one that comes in, it's very interesting. I'm like, okay, let me read that right now. I also love entertainment. So I have a lot of entertainment stories I love. I love pop culture. So that's like my entertainment for myself, is to read pop culture stuff. And I get a lot of news on Twitter. As we know, Twitter often breaks the news.
Right.
So I'm often checking out Twitter to see what's going on. And then one of the places I go to first is see what's trending. So I can see what I may have missed. And so I have a mix of news and pop culture stuff on my trending when they say what's suggested for you. So I guess my consumption is just trying to read all the time. I don't take the weekends off. I try not to, but I have a busy daughter. We travel for volleyball, so there are some weekends where we're doing volleyball 8 hours a day, so I'm not consuming anything. So there's many weekends that go by, I have no idea what happened in the world. And I come in on Monday like, okay, I have no idea. People are like, well, this happened. Didn't know it happened because I've been in volleyball all day, then gone to bed.
That's good. That's healthy. You need space. You need to
Got to get away from it.
Yeah.
You do, but you need to know. I mean, I just feel like I need to know. I need to be able to converse intelligently about what's the current events that's, so.
It's true. It's kind of.
I also think it's interesting the point you made about your telephone, because before it used to be you've heard about it on the radio, you watched it on the TV news at night, then you read about it in the newspaper the next day. Now with news almost sort of being instantaneous, it's on Twitter, it's on Facebook, it's being updated on a regular basis. And sometimes I think, well, not anybody here, but sometimes I think we can get maybe ahead of ourselves, that in the rush to be first, sometimes I think the facts tend to suffer a little bit. And I've always been taught, and always will believe, and also tell my journalism students, I'd rather be second and right than first and wrong.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely.
everybody's got it's, there used to be that common deadline for everybody, and now the deadline is just all day long, 24 hours
Constant.
a day on Twitter. But I also like the point that you made, Oseye, about ProPublica, because they do some fantastic work. And we were talking about the impact of advertising earlier, and that's a good example of how journalism is evolving. And a lot of journalism now is coming from the nonprofit sector, where you see more and more outlets that are not so much with the advertiser model, but they're getting donations from large donors, from foundations that support nonprofit journalism. We've seen that pop up in a lot of other states when it comes to public affairs reporting. In Texas, there's a fantastic news operation called the Texas Tribune that operates under that model. And that's something that you might see happen more and more in other states around the country in the coming years. We'll see.
Excellent. I think that talking about the role of social media and Twitter algorithms, Facebook algorithms, and tweaks to policy, that's a subject of a whole different series of panels. It's such a big question, and it's such an important question. Like just a few weeks ago, I thought they deleted the retweet, where you had to you couldn't retweet. You could only comment on it, and they make you read the article first. And those are probably good things, but it's still surprising and unilateral. And all this question about should these organizations have such arbitrary authority over our public discourse. So anyway, I think that's a very important, but maybe a separate topic of conversation. But as we wrap up, I have a concluding question. We've had a very, shall we say, acrimonious last 4 years in our media culture, especially between our public leaders and the media. And and this has led to increased polarization, partisanship, and also declined public trust in the media as well, which is bad for everyone. We need an informed citizenry to have a democracy. So I'm wondering, how has the last 4 years of our divided media culture, how might that inform your next 4 years? New president, new era, and how might media be a tool of cultural healing and elevate our national and local conversation?
Well, I think more conversations like these are helpful. Anything that seriously that really informs people and engages the community to talk about, and engages us to talk about the media in a way that's transparent and introspective, and things that we can do to better inform our viewers. I think that you mentioned the public trust. I think in so many ways, many different institutions have suffered a loss in public trust for various reasons. That's not to let us off the hook. I think in the media, there's obviously a lot of things that we can do better, but it seems in the past few years, so many institutions, there's been a loss of trust for various different reasons. So I know that we're just going to continue to do the job that we've always done, to be tough but fair, to ask difficult questions and probing questions, and try to get answers from public officials, and get to the truth of any story that we go out and cover. And I think some of that also does fall on us to be more transparent about how our processes work, because people are examining the media with more scrutiny. And I think that that's going to be interesting to see how different media organizations maybe do that in different ways over the coming years.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in. I always, from a business perspective, always view chaos as opportunity. And so we've seen a lot of chaos, and I see potential opportunity. And so, and that opportunity kind of goes back to, I may have commented a little bit on, I think, if you go back to the original reason why newspapers, for example, came about, right? It was to keep the community informed, to educate, just as Oseye said, to educate, to empower, and engage. I come back to that. I think she's so right on. And I think that the citizens want more than ever to have civil discourse around important public policy and local issues, and do so in a forum like this, or at least in a calm and civilized way. So we're thinking about lots of different opportunities around that type of discussion, both in written form and otherwise. And I think there's a hunger for it. I know there's a hunger for it. So we're gonna do all we can to fill that void, and to be the convener, and to be the place where people can have those types of conversations, and partner with all of you. I hope to be able to do that. I mean, there's the local, I think local reporting, as I said earlier, matters so much, and I think there's a huge hunger for it. And I think the people are ready to tune out a little bit more nationally and tune in more locally, because that's where their families live, it's where they go to school, it's where they are educated, and so on. So I'm optimistic that there will be positive changes that'll take place, that'll fill some of the void that's there today.
That's great. Thank you, Nate.
No, I agree. One thing I look forward to is not having a president who's on Twitter every 5 seconds. I'm looking forward to that. And so that way, because he's not on Twitter threatening to not sign the defense bill because he's mad about Facebook and Twitter said something bad about him, I'm looking forward to that kind of going away. And then more of a focus on state and local issues, because those are going to be really important, particularly next session. We got a budget going on, you got a teacher pay issue that we have to figure out. We have less revenue coming in, and then that's going to, the following year, it's going to impact local governments, because local governments get their money from the state about a year to a year and a half later. And if the state's short on cash, then guess what? Local government's going to be short on cash as well. So I think there are a lot of state and local issues that'll require to be focused on. But I'm just looking forward to a president who is not on Twitter every 5 seconds.
I have to co-sign that sentiment. Yeah, that has been really, really strange to have a president so engaged on social media, on Twitter. Yeah, that's
the ultimate disintermediation, you know,
Yeah.
the ultimate, like, getting rid of the gatekeepers.
Yeah,
Well, and it's put Twitter and Facebook in the role where they
That's right.
be a gatekeeper
That's
for the
right.
first time, and to put
That's right.
out, you know, flags on particular tweets that aren't true, and that's obviously been a source of conversation and debate as well.
Yeah. So for me, I think even though we've had a heightened kind of disbelief in media, it's always been there. We've always been accused of pandering to one side or another, or not always telling the truth. So that's always been there. I've always been, I don't know about you guys, but I'm the only one in my family. I'm the only one that I'm originally from Muncie. So I'm like the only Black person people knew for a long time in journalism. There's a few more now who've come along, but so I was the one everyone would come to and tell me what's wrong or what was in the local paper that I worked for that wasn't right. So I've always been the person that's kind of defended what we do to anyone and everyone. I've actually been accused by someone who just met me for the first time, and I told them what I did. Oh, you're the one who writes those lies. I'm like, no.
Oh my God.
That's not what I do.
You
That
too.
is not what I do. That was way back in the early 2000s. So well before what's going on now. So no. So we've always had that idea that we don't tell the truth. And I've always defended what we do and let people know. And I think what we do is kind of mysterious for a lot of people. So there's really no understanding of how we make things happen. So I've always tried to educate people that I come in contact with, not take them all the way into the weeds of everything and the depths, but just kind of understanding, okay, this is what we do. You know, we call people, we ask people questions, you know, this is how kind of how it goes down. And so it gives people a better understanding. So therefore, when they talk to someone, because I've educated my parents on what I do. So now when someone says something about, oh, well, the media, and he can say, well, no, my daughter works for a newspaper. She's been doing it for over 20 years, and this is what they do. So I think those kind of conversations help people to understand what we do much better. And it's that education that kind of keeps us, people from thinking that we're just making up lies and fake news all the time. Because most people that I know in this industry, we really care about the words that we write or the things we say, or, we are trying very hard to be as accurate as we can at that time. Now, things change. We know news changes. And that's different from us not being honest, and I try to make sure if we make a mistake, acknowledge a mistake. Your readers will trust you when they know that you own up to what you've done. Don't brush it under the rug. Tell them, okay, this is a correction. We need to correct this. Those are the little things I think we can do to regain trust, is to let people know we will try to be as honest as we can with you with the information we have at the time. We don't know everything. We will not know something happening as soon as it happens all the time. And we can't always get everything right when people are not being truthful. If you're not being truthful with me and I report that, it's not the same thing as me not being truthful. I'm reporting what you told me. And I think that gets misconstrued with the public, and they think, oh, well, you lied. No, or the person that's told us this, so there's a lot of things that happen in the newsroom and happens really quickly that people don't understand. But I think as the more we let people understand what we do, and we try to make sure that we're transparent as possible and honest as possible, I think we'll regain that trust. I don't think we'll ever regain it completely. So I just think that's just kind of, like I said, we've always had that mistrust. But people know, especially when it comes to local news, when they start knowing those local people, they have more of a trust of local people for sure.
Oseye, that is so wise what you said about part of rebuilding trust is owning up to shortcomings, being the first one to acknowledge when you've made a mistake or inaccurately characterize something. And that reminds me that during this election, just last month, I was so impressed, kind of ending on a hopeful note. I was very impressed by this sort of across the board, humble disposition on the part of media, where they're like, we are not going to call this race until we absolutely know. And
Well, Saturday at 11:30.
Right. I think you're right. I think everyone did a very admirable job.
It was very commendable.
A lot of restraint. Yeah.
And I think related to that is like just how vastly wrong and undermined polling was last time around in 2016, and how wrong it was. I think there's just this there is this humility that is pervasive in our culture right now that I think this is a prime time to kind of reevaluate and capitalize and continue to have conversations like this. Like, okay, things have not gone according to plan. What do we do now?
In many ways, all year long.
So many ways.
Not according to plan.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So I just want to thank so much to each of you, Oseye, Nate, Dan, Abdul, for being here and being part of this conversation. You are all leaders in your respective fields and have a really important role in not just talking about this, but living out these ideas and living out these solutions. So really grateful to your leadership and to you donating an hour of your night to be here. And thanks to our viewers for caring enough about these ideas and these conversations to stick it out to the end and to be here as well. So hopefully here's to more conversations like this in the future. And thanks to all of you.
Oh, my dog is much smarter after having listened to this conversation. So.
But that was a pretty high bar to do.
He was very good.
Nice to be with you all.